Bajadi Gamarua Gadigal Eora. Good day and welcome to Gadigal and Eora country, where these podcasts are being made. I'm Uncle Michael from Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, and we're the custodians of land, air, water and culture within our boundaries. Our elders and members would like to welcome everyone here to these podcasts, and we'd like to acknowledge that it is on the land of the Gadigal, and we'd like to also acknowledge all the different countries, clans, tribes and nations around New South Wales and around Australia, but we'd also like to further acknowledge those other countries from around the world and the First Nations people from around the world who also understand the connection to country and how important it is to look after Mother Earth and to the spirituality and culture that's in there. As we say here in Sydney, it came out of Redfern, always was, always will be Aboriginal land, never ceded. Paddling out from the Opera House, you look across the other side of the coat hanger, the Harbour Bridge is affectionately called by Sydney-siders, is the suburb of Cammeray, named after the Cammeraygal clan over there. And as you turn west, heading inland, you would possibly see Barani coming in for a rest. That's what you see traditionally with their little calves. Barani are whales. They would come in, they would go to Darling Harbour, which is traditional name Gomera, and they would rest there. Barani would know coming in here would be safe because they're part of the totems of the Gadigal clan. But also on the other side of the harbour, on the north side of the harbour, we have Cammeraygal, and they have engravings of Barani. So you need to remember that Barani, the whale, would be part of other clans, nations and tribes going up and down the coast as part of their totems.
Welcome to Busting Buzzwords, the podcast where we tackle those words that mean so much to our work, yet so little. In the aim to what, Ben?
Bust them.
Bust them. And today we're extremely lucky to have with us Bruce Isaacs. Welcome, Bruce.
Hi, Clara. Hi, Ben. It's so nice to be here.
What are we going to talk about today, Bruce?
Okay, so my buzzword is lecture.
Why lecture?
Yeah, big word.
Okay, it's one of the most contentious things in the whole higher education global world, because it's either dead and we should never again have a lecture, or it's the most sacred thing in the history of academia, and how could we ever consider that we would give away lectures? And I kind of sit on the fence with this stuff, to be honest. Like, my two great experiences with the lecture, both at, special sacred spaces. So a movie, Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I remember being a kid or teenager watching that, and Van Helsing gives a lecture. And it's in Germany, so it's probably at one of the grand institutes. And he gives a lecture, and when he finishes, all the men in the audience, they're all men, they're all dressed in perfect suits. They literally slam the desk in applause. And, for a young, extremely impressionable person as I was, but always fascinated with knowledge and history, I just thought, whoa, this is so cool. So performative. I didn't think that then, but now looking back at it, it's so performative. And so for me, lectures have always been this very performative thing. One other quick story. I came to Sydney Uni and I was doing the Shakespeare course. And again, very young, impressionable. I go into N395 in Woolly, which is still there today. It's got these old, 150 wooden benches. You sit in it, after 2 hours, your butt is killing you, right? And I just remember this lecture theatre. And the wonderful Rob Jackson, who retired many years ago now, was giving the lecture on King Lear. And so he was going to read Lear's soliloquy on the heath. And so he said, and I'm not making this up, he said, look, I tend to get a little bit, he's a very, very, he's a quiet man, very gentle. He said, I tend to get a bit worked up when I'm reading Shakespeare, so just bear with me. And he said, and to those of you in the front, I apologize, because occasionally some spittle might. So this
can't have that now post. Well, now we can have it again.
You can have it again.
There's no more sanitation of any sort.
Liberal saliva, right?
Right.
This guy,
just a coating.
This gentle, incredibly quiet, beautiful guy became Lear in N395. I couldn't believe it. I left. I'm telling you the story now. 2 decades later because it made such an impression on me. So I have something deep and kind of romantic about what the lecture historically has been. I think it's important. I think it's meaningful. I hate the fact that as a global higher education community, we've kind of forgotten that history, as if to say it doesn't matter, that space of the sort of the expert at the front, this great fount of knowledge, and the students who want to hang on every word, as if that meant nothing for several hundred years. And I don't think that's true. Where we're at now, I think that lectures are becoming really flexible, fluid. People don't attend a lot. That kind of saddens me. I will say that, nowhere near on the level of Rob Jackson, but I'm a sort of performative lecturer myself, and I do love that experience with students. I think there's nothing like it, right?
And I mean, sorry, just to interrupt you there,
please.
but on that note, coming in and people might, I guess most people would know you, but maybe for those who don't know you and your very effective take on the lecture and what it means. So maybe can you just introduce yourself and your
Sure. I forgot about that.
We were so this is Clara. You see, people are so engaged in the bust or the dust.
The dust, the bust of the dust,
The busting or the dusting of these big buzzwords that maybe we just have to go back a quick moment and say who Bruce is. Bruce Isaacs, who are you?
So I'm an academic at Sydney Uni. I'm an associate professor and I'm in film studies. So my area of work is film, popular culture, music, but much more important than my role or my job is how that's just a seamless fit with my life. Like I'm really into pop culture and art and sharing that with people. So one of the reasons I love the lecture as a format is because I see it as completely dialogical. I never thought about it in any other way. So that idea that, if you're sitting with people, you can feel their energy. You could feel, it's their body. It's it's the kind of incline of their neck forward. And if you're lecturing, if anyone listening has lectured or has been in that space, you kind of know, you feel a room. It's so obvious. It's so palpable. That's the biggest rush I get. With language, right? There's all that thing of its natural impulses about communication, right? And it's about, I always love what you say, Clara, around language and its relationship to culture.
Yeah.
And I think there's always a sense of, hey, we're sharing something here. Well, I think all teaching is really that. And the lecture, I know a lot of people say, well, a lecture is just this kind of sage on the stage talking to people. Like, one, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yep.
Two, I would like to think it's never been that way in a lecture that I've done because I just love the students too much.
You were talking about the fact that language and culture are always interconnected. When I first encountered the concept of lectures through its French counterpart, which is cours magistral.
Yeah, right.
And it's essentially
What's that?
Cours magistral,
Right.
Latin root magister, which is not maître, master, but like the person who holds the knowledge. And it's like this lecture that someone gives, but magistral is an adjective that's also used to describe a mind-blowing performance.
Yes, like magisterial.
Exactly.
Right,
and so as a young student, I got to a lecture hall for the first time and I was expecting that. And then instead, my expectations just, it felt like a souffle that was left out for too long because I was expecting that and I didn't get it.
So that's really, so you were expecting that, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what I wanted. Like when I came to Sydney Uni, I wanted the Rob Jacksons to be doing their Lear. That was like 1 in every 100 lectures.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's because when I first came here as an exchange student, I had the privilege of sitting on lectures that were so amazing. It blew my mind, opened my eyes to what a real lecture would be. And the first lecture I ever attended was in political science with a colleague. I don't know if he's still here. His name was Darmid Maguire, and he was Irish.
Yeah.
I did not understand a word that he said. When I say not a word, it was not a word. But I felt the lecture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was.
Hey, passion goes a long way with the lecturing world, right? Again, okay, I said an audience, you can feel the audience. Well, the audience feels you.
Yeah.
Right? We survey students like to death, right, at this place. One thing we know is a constancy is I want the lecturer to like feel like they want to be there.
Yeah.
I want to feel the passion from them. That is in every survey that we take of students. It's like the one thing that you can't fake that stuff.
No, that's true. But then on the other hand, you get, how are you supposed to continue giving that passion if you've got 5 people in front of you?
Well, I remember talking to my dean a few years ago saying, like, I'm concerned because teaching and learning has been for me the lifeblood of my career. And I remember saying to her, like, it's just not as much fun anymore. Like, students don't come to the classes as much. There isn't that real sense of we're all in this together. Like, this is one huge adventure.
Yeah.
It's and I'm not criticizing students at all. It's the nature of like the evolution of the medium of higher education, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the difficulties is, as academics, the 3 of us, we're having to relinquish something.
Yeah.
And there's, for me, there's real sadness in it. That's why I love doing stuff like this, because I feel like there's this infinite imagined audience somewhere, which I think is amazing.
As people might be able to figure out on their own, listening to Clara and Bruce going on and on, it's like really, the passion, I think, becomes there's no spittle, I can say that. It's fine at the moment, but people are very committed here to the idea of the lecture but just, not to play devil's advocate here, but maybe to play, Gen Z's advocate. So the lecture, you walk across campus. Some of the rooms are completely empty. I see people posting on Twitter from the UK, other areas posting where there's nobody there. It's like, 9 a.m. I'm here. Where are the students? So the lecture, because it is such a buzzword.
Yeah.
What does it mean? How would we define it? And I think, that's why we're here to either say, is it really busted, or is it just living on in our own sense of like, this could be an amazing thing, if only. But what do we understand by lecture? So, Bruce, if you may be so kind again to say, so what, because, we come more from the humanities, maybe it's different in other cultures, different in other areas of the university. So what does lecture mean to you? Very like sort of basic
I think
idea.
Traditionally what it's always meant is that this person with a lot of knowledge and expertise is going to communicate that to a bunch of people, usually students, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's a dominant model, I would say, for a couple of 100 years. We challenged that model, I'd say, significantly from around 1960 or so. And so the lecture is still, if you were to ask me how would I describe it, it's usually still a room with people in it and a person or maybe 2 people speaking to that group. And what we take, I think if I ask most high school students, what's the difference between your class and when you get to uni one day and you go to a lecture, I think what they're going to say is, when I'm in a lecture, I'm going to go into this room and I'm not going to speak. And there's just going to be a person speaking for an hour. Because I've seen, all of John Hughes from the 1980s, and I know what this looks like. That, I think, has been the dominant model. That's the model I've been talking about in such romantic terms, right? That I want to be close to this world of the university and its history. I think where we're at now is that we know that format has limitations. Right? Massive limitations. Like, number one, we just know that lectures are not necessarily engaging. Like, as Clara just said, you wanted this amazing performance. But to be honest, most of the lectures you go to, like, I've been in lectures for 2 hours and a person just read a script for 2 hours. Now, hey, I don't care how much you're into something. That's hard. That is really hard to listen to.
And it goes along with these terms that we just mentioned. The buzzword then would be lecture, but then it goes along with terms like engagement.
Yes.
Passion, attention, all these things that I think we found during the pandemic particularly were very much challenged and questioned as, like, how can attention happen? How can engagement and passion happen through a mediation device? Like, when students are coming now to tell me, do I have to be here because, I've got work now.
Yep.
I've got all these other, important things in my life. So I feel lecture sometimes is that one component of teaching and learning that they feel is not that much the priority.
No.
So for them, sometimes it means, there's this like information and I need to have it, but the way that it gets to me can be a recording and whatnot. Yep. And then the question then to me becomes, so if the lecture is, it could be this amazing thing that you just said, but what if, because I'm in translation studies as well, so I'm like, how do we translate that to the students and how we translate it to each other? It's like different areas across campus. In sciences, they've got like 4,000 people in the lecture. So we rely on technology to make that accessible for people with disabilities or learning issues or even regional students. So my question would be, is our idea of the lecture something that we have to, as academics, like what we're doing right here now, talk about, evolve? Is it something that we need to kind of be better at communicating?
I also think, what I've described as like the lecture is a pretty exclusive and rarefied experience, right? So I also want to make that point that everything I described about, young men in an auditorium slapping the desk because to show their applause, that is itself a kind of elite positioning of the student. That's not, the way that I think we like to think of education as something democratic, egalitarian. And I like what you said there, Ben, about, part of what we're trying to do is also provide access to people who may have a disability, for example, right, who live remotely and they struggle to come in. So we've done all of these things. And I don't think it's attention so much. I think you're right. I think we are, as a higher education world, having to confront the fact that that old model is just not perfectly suited to the world we live in. That's not to say we ditch it. I don't think we should ditch it entirely, but we've kind of got to expand our parameters of what is possible in the lecture, which I think we're trying to do. And I'm always going to, have a sense of deep nostalgia for that. Right. And try to use that. And I still do lectures. But I've absolutely not only had to, but chosen to embrace new modalities. Yeah. I'll do like a visual essay or a podcast. So I do a podcast in first year, the FAS course, right? So I deliberately do that because it's not just, hey, there are limitations to me saying you all have to be in a lecture on Tuesday morning, but it's also there's all this technology, there's all this media around us. Surely we need to think of the lecture in more diverse terms.
So then if you think about the romanticized idea of the lecture, because it reminds me a little bit of The Walking Dead in the sense. No, but it's true because you have this idea that seems to be dead.
Yes.
I'm using a crude term on purpose, but I feel like today, if we're trying to replicate this old romanticized idea of the lecture in the current climate, current terms, current means, etc., we end up with something like The Walking Dead because it's like we haven't adapted.
No, we haven't.
What we currently we haven't adapted to the new audience that we have or to the more diverse, varied audience. And we haven't used the tools at our disposal to make that work. Yep. So then my question is, how do we reconcile that? So you were talking about podcasts, but do you think that these diversified modes of lecturing still retain this romanticized idea of it?
That's a great question, right? I think I have some strong opinions on this. Right? Okay. I think the elephant in the room is there's a major tension right now in the global higher ed sector about what higher education should even look like. Yeah. And to be honest, I don't think there's a consensus. I don't think there's clarity around this is a good tertiary education in 2023. We do know there are limitations to that traditional model. Yeah. We also know there are profound limitations to the newer models that have come in. So yes, I can pre-record a lecture. I can do an asynchronous sort of lecture recording. A student can access that at any time and at any place. But there is that question, what is the nature of that experience? And we would have to acknowledge it's a different experience. It's not me necessarily saying it's better or worse, but I think what we're trying to come to terms with, certainly I can say this, that I should also say I'm also the Associate Dean for Education in the faculty. So I actually have these conversations all the time with people, right, in the senior executive. And one of the positions I have is that we have to fully embrace new modes. I just think it's part of life. Like, I don't consume information in one way. I consume things across at least 4 or 5 platforms, right? So if we're talking about that level of diversification of simply the consumption of information, surely we're going to have to understand that students coming through are also diversifying their modes of consumption. If we're going to develop that really well as a university, we're going to need, I think, significant investment in infrastructure, but also things like training and skilling up. I was talking to Jacob runs the studio with Tyler the other day, and we came in to do a video thing, and I was Luke, the person recording, was recording my PhD student talking about what does it feel like to be a PhD student, and it was really interesting that she did a wonderful job, but she was so nervous, right? And because I do it all the time, for me it's just like I got to take off in like 15 minutes sort of thing, and so when I get on, it's just like Luke, we got to get this done. But for my student, she was so nervous, and she did a wonderful job, but she found it very awkward.
Yeah.
And I think that as we go forward, let's say next 10 years as a university, how do you produce content that's really engaging? Well, now you not only have to be passionate in a lecture theatre, you have to be passionate in a podcast.
Yep.
You got to be passionate on video. Like, we're not trained for that stuff.
On top of that, I think one of the mistakes that we've been making, and I'm speaking quite frankly here, is this idea that there's a cookie cutter approach to our students.
Totally
Our
agree.
students come with a certain cultural background, life experiences.
And so just to chime in here, but I think it's exactly that they're coming as both of you, Bruce and Clara, what you were just saying is they're coming also with, I think that's just important to stress, they come with a certain technological expectation.
Yep.
Yeah.
So as you were just saying, the podcast, audio, there's video, there's all these mixed media approaches. So they're coming to us now with, and I just want to again stress this point, the lecture, which is the thing we are trying to kind of, bust or kind of dust here, is this term of how functional is that term in the conversation about good or whatever good education means to us. So is then the lecture kind of like this kind of umbrella term for like technological competence. So are you able as the lecturer, whatever that means. I have never heard somebody talk about the seminarian, if you're very good at doing a seminar.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like the show-poning thing where, then, you're so good as, the podcaster, but that's not really that. So is again the lecture almost like this anachronistic kind of super, romanticized thing that we know more from the movies, like Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
That's what always
that's a perfect example, right?
That's sort of prompting fiery passion from me now, because the word you kept repeating is good lecture. You're putting a judgment of value, but can you actually put a judgment of value on the learning experience you're going to provide?
But that's my
to
point.
A student is what is the lecture? If it isn't a certain modality, you're going to provide the learning experience for the student through.
Right. But that's exactly, I think, the point, because the lecture is a buzzword. Is always paired with adjectives, like ever since I've been here, it's always paired with good lecture, passionate, commitment, engaging lecture. But what do these terms exactly mean? Particularly like to the person, teaching that lecture.
It doesn't qualify the content as much as the delivery of it. So,
well, I think that's a big thing we need to embrace at the university.
Right.
I think we still think of, when I'm using that traditional term of lecturer, that is, as you say, this magisterial figure in knowledge and performance. That said, I mean, I think when we teach, we have to understand that how you do it has an impact on what it is you're doing, right? And I think that's something we haven't embraced. I'm shocked that still seems to me like a pretty silent idea, that if we really embrace that, we would say, okay, at the University of Sydney, we are never going to have content in week one. We are just all going to hang out with each other and meet, because that's what facilitates good learning for the next 12 weeks. But we don't do that, because we're still steeped in a kind of very traditional model.
You do and you don't. Like, there's a lot of ways to do that without.
Well, I know you do.
No.
You're a very good teacher.
Thank you, but I think it's a shame that it has to be done in a sly way.
Yeah.
It has to be done under cover of we're actually doing something.
Yes.
When in fact, how can I assume that you guys are going to work well together if you don't even understand what makes each other tick?
I mean, think about that in your own life, right? Where do you go in your own life where you are asked to, in a sense, perform without knowing anyone in the room, was feeling really intimidated by the place you're in, and no one's giving you a chance just to be comfortable, just to chill for a bit?
Yeah.
And yet that's what, especially for first years.
And that's where the sense of insecurity stems from.
Yeah.
Like, I was having a chat with a student today about ChatGPT and an assignment, and I said to them, look, I don't care that you've used ChatGPT for that, because what I care about is that I can't assess your writing.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I'm currently assessing your ability to rely on a tool to produce content that is excellent.
Yeah.
But that's not what I want to assess. I want to assess how you engage with the content, how you write. And what stemmed from that conversation was a deep sense of insecurity that was so heartbreaking to witness. And it stemmed from the fact that this student had never felt that they belonged in the classroom.
Yeah. But see, then how do you make the lecture a place of belonging, a place where they feel safe enough to engage? Because, in the lecture, if, in my opinion at least, it's there to warm up knowledge. Like it's kind of the interface to knowledge. So where you can really engage, like deep, like long-form content, like the essay, the lecture. Yeah. So what kind of knowledge transmission device is it? As a piece of technology, it would be like, what does it do? It warms up. It, it brings closer. It creates intimacy with knowledge and ideas.
Something that I think is also overlooked is that the lecture is currently the only modality in which all students are supposedly in one place at the same time.
And that means something.
And that means a lot. And so how,
very much.
It's not currently in practice, but the ideal, the rationale is a kind of togetherness.
Yeah, exactly.
And a togetherness in sharing something that I think all three of us would say is really special. This is like what we've given our lives to, right, in the university. And again, that's a part of something that is kind of broken, right? Because as much as we've lost that, no one's going to be able to tell me that Zoom and asynchronous content and video production has been able to reproduce that fantastic immersive experience. I think we're working on it, but we're certainly a distance from it.
Yeah. The key point is togetherness.
Yeah.
Is what you were saying. So how can we make the lecture not necessarily about the content delivery, the content or the delivery of the content, but more about creating a safe space and a safe learning environment where students actually want
I have a
to
good
be
answer
there.
for that, Clara. That all lecturers should realize that the lecture is not for you. The lecture is for the people sitting in front of you.
Yeah.
And if you can go in with that mindset, because that's a very hard mindset to take on if you are this magisterial figure.
Yeah,
It's really hard to divest yourself of, hey, I'm the center here. Because everyone's looking at you.
Yeah.
Everyone whispers when you walk into the room. Everyone has to keep quiet. They all have to... you ask a question and they're all like, oh my God, don't look at me, that kind. So you are such a center of power. How do you just undercut yourself a bit?
Yeah.
So there's lots of things you can do.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, when we do the teaching development program, we script the first 10 minutes of lecture one.
Yeah.
Literally just, how do you undercut your power? That's what you have to do. And if you're an amazing comedian and you have that personality for timing, do something like that. But if that's not you, that's okay. There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do.
Fall off the stairs and you'll be fine. You'll be fine.
Or tell a terrible dad joke. Like
there you go. That
do
can work.
both. Tell it while you're falling down the stairs.
Yeah, but I think that's the key, because I think there's a sense of something rather petrifying.
Yeah.
When as a student you get into a lecture hall with someone who's there and you're in anticipation for whatever they're going to say. So there's this two-way petrification where the lecturer is petrified because they're like, oh my God, what if I say something wrong? Yeah. And then the student is petrified because they're like, oh, what am I going to do? They ask me a question.
How many situations, because Bruce, what you were saying at the beginning, going back to that, and because we have to wrap up soon, and just the idea of, this image you just conjured, this, group of people just knocking on the benches, like knuckles on bench, producing that kind of hard, like really harsh sound. Mm. And then it comes to the question of, so what can you offer to the lecturer to kind of break that illusion and give up their power? As you were saying, it's an exercise in ego, I guess, then before me. But then again, as Clara, you were just pointing out, is it more about being a bit more meta, just explaining to the students, so we are all in this kind of field space together. What kind of power, is it, I guess that's my last question here, to kind of think about whether we are busting or dusting this idea of the lecture. Is it much more about putting the human face to this and saying, being a bit more vulnerable, whatever the word might be, transparent about, so what kind of constructedness is behind the lecture and what is it doing for us?
Amazingly, I was thinking of those two words as you were speaking.
Right.
Number one, which is a big wave at the moment, be human. I would go there with, be yourself, right? One of the things I love about lecturing.
Just be you.
Just be you.
Nothing to it.
But
just be you.
So I'll give you some examples of things I do to be me in a lecture. Halftime, we do a thing called Always Halftime Entertainment, and I will either play a song, right, on the screen. And I do this especially for people who don't know anyone else and they don't walk and they're not chatting to their friends. And so I'll put on something that means something to me. Or I'll get students to make recommendations during the week and we put that up. And students love that, right? So it's, again, how are we going to share something of ourselves, not just the content I've got on my pages here that you need for your assignment? So being human. And the other thing I love what you said, like be a bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
And there's a weird tension there because vulnerability can be like real, which is good. It can also be performative, which is almost as good. Which is to say, like I'm more than happy to talk about myself to the students and also to talk about my failings.
And it doesn't take away from the proficiency.
Not at all.
You were just saying, this is idea of like, okay, I don't might want a doctor coming in my, like surgery and then telling me, and like, their hands are shaking and they're like, ooh, I'm not quite sure what the liver is. Let's go for it. Like, you don't want that, obviously. But, at the same time, it's like, as you were saying, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
I don't need these like, knuckle banging, people just, just giving me these like echo chambers. But then, that's, I guess, our idea of the lecture maybe is very different.
But it goes two ways, right? So to students who attend lectures, hey, like occasionally go to the lecture and say, hey, that was really, if you liked it, go and say something.
Yeah.
Or send them an email and go, like, I really thought that was so interesting. And I love the way you talked about this. And I got so much out. Teaching can be a really isolated space, isolating as well. Like to all students listening, it feels so nice when a teacher feels like they made an impression.
Yep.
Like you did something for me. That to me is better than publishing an article or getting a good review.
Hands down.
Because I got a real person saying, hey, you like really impacted me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and it's funny because these moments help you. When you're swamped with marking or you're in a dead end and
when you're tired.
And I said, a couple of weeks ago, I said to the students, 3 p.m. Thursday tutorial, I said, look, I'm coming to you after 4 hours of teaching on 2 hours sleep. So
Do you have like 4 hours back to back?
No, 4 hours during the day.
Oh, thank God. I was thinking.
And I said to them,
even that's exhausting.
And I was like, so what I say might not make a lot of sense. So we're going to work together on that. And we just had a chat. And I'm very lucky that I have 3 students in that particular group that are training to be teachers.
Oh, good.
And they said to me, this is something we want to take away, is the fact that you just basically came at us on our level and told us something about you.
Students want to feel like we're connecting.
Connectedness.
There's a connection here between us. Like,
Yeah.
you're not just that person, and I'm not just here taking the class because you've been, anointed the lecturer. Like, there's something between us here.
Yeah.
Like some of those engagements have been lost. Like I'm constantly amazed that students don't say go to the lecturer's room in the week and just chat. I used to do that all the time. I'd be in philosophy and I'd go, oh God, I don't understand that at all. And I would just go to the lecturer and the lecturer would be sitting there because no one goes. And you sit down and you talk for half an hour. And there are things that were said in those half hours that I remember today.
Because, a colleague of mine from America was once saying when I was at Georgetown and we were like brand new to teaching, it was like the second or something year I taught. And it was like, what the students go to for you, what they come to you is like they want connection.
Yeah.
They get information from the back then maybe library or internet. From you, they get connection. That's what they want.
Yeah.
And so, again, along those lines, this buzzword, and we have to kind of wrap this up here, is
busted or
is it
dusted?
Busted or dusted?
I don't think it's. I don't think it's either. I think we've just opened up Pandora's box when it comes to the lecture because
send this recording to Adam Bridgman. Okay? Adam's great, but I want to give. I want people to understand that there are people still committed to what a lecture is, and that it's not about the elitism, the rarefication of this experience. It's about we believe there's a connection here. Yeah. There's something meaningful, and I hope the university doesn't just go, no, we're stopping it, no more.
Yeah,
because that would be incredibly sad.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think irrespective of where we stand on the fence of whether the lecture is a thing of the past or something we should embrace. I think we should all recognize this idea of connectedness, that the lecture is what connects students together, or in principle, on paper. on paper, right? Because in practice, it's very different. And I think it's the shortcomings of the practice that maybe have sparked the discussion about whether lectures are relevant or not. But I think it's opened the conversation. I think more conversations should be had. Like candid conversations about what it means to people.
Beyond the word, beyond the buzzword, beyond the buzz.
Students. Like I would love to know what students, occasionally like I'll do a lecture and people say, well, I really thought that was, great and exciting. And I think we shouldn't forget that there is still connections, in pockets, like in places a student can get really impacted by something like that. And I'm not saying they wouldn't be on a Zoom or in an asynchronous space, but to understand that, look, there's continuity, there's hundreds of years, right? And we shouldn't just kill something without trying to imagine its continuation in some way.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. Well, thanks so much, Bruce,
for
taking the time to come with us.
So nice talking to you guys. This has been so much fun.
A bit of busting.
Bit of busting and a bit of dusting. And to our listeners, let us know what you thought on @bustingbuzzwords on Twitter or X. Like, I don't know if we say Twitter or if we say X
I think
anymore.
It's X.
It's X. So,
I heard someone
follow
for
us.
the first time using X the other day.
But that sounds weird.
Well, hey,
follow
Elon
us.
Musk is weird, right?
True. Well, follow us on X. Let us know what you thought. And we might continue with another conversation.
The fact that we have a Twitter is news to me now. So, of course, follow us.
Guys, could I do a quick spruik for film versus film?
Yeah,
yes.
Of course, go ahead.
Just very quickly, people listening, I do a film podcast called Film versus Film. You can find it on anything, but you got to spell the whole word versus VRSUS. And we are just looking at Back to the Future versus Arrival this week, and looking at time travel and the Judeo-Christian arrow of time versus Henri Bergson's complex temporality. It's not as highfalutin as that, but check out Film versus Film and let me know what you think.
I sense there's a great lecture there.
Nice.
I actually do a lecture on arrival and the relationship of time to experience, which is what I think students like that.
Right, Bruce Isaacs coming to us talking about lecture. What a good buzzword. Yeah.
And thank you to you two, one, for both being amazing teachers, because I know these guys really well, and two, for doing this sort of work, because I think it's important to keep alive like debate around words in the higher education, because some of it's gone nuts, right? There's so much fetishism around words, right?
Let's not start there, because we could continue on a whole hour. Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Ben.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bruce.